Hey there everybody, welcome to my new show, In Defense Of, where I defend a group or subject against its common misconceptions or criticisms. The subjects will range from a lot of different things, but today we're going to start with eSports. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of eSports or have a good idea of what it is. Some of you may not, so I decided to get into a little bit of the history so we can all learn a little something. The first known video game competition happened all the way back in 1972 at Stanford, when most of you weren't born yet, and some of your parents probably weren't either. But anyway, the game was called Space War, and it was played on science lab equipment because those were really the only computers back then. There wasn't a whole lot of home computing going on, and it was played at many schools across the nation. The grand prize for winners of the competition was a year subscription to Rolling Stone magazine. Times have changed just a little bit. After that came Pong, and then video games really started to take off. In the 80s, it was the time of the arcades. Donkey Kong, Galaga, Joust, lots and lots of different games came out, and there was many different competitions. One of the biggest games of the 80s, Pac-Man, still has people competing in it today trying to set high scores. But not all of the arcade games had that kind of lifespan. When Nintendo was introduced in 1989, that started the slow but inevitable decline of arcades. Most of you probably know that arcades don't really exist nowadays. You've got Dave & Buster's and some other places, and now there's some retro bars, stuff like that, but it's not anywhere near where it was in the 80s and early 90s. In 1990, Nintendo themselves started their first World Championships. For the World Championships, they released a special cartridge that had switches on the back so you could set different parameters for the actual competitions, and it is now actually one of the most valuable video games in the world. While consoles dominated the home market for a long time, the competition scene was decidedly different than what we see today. The lack of online capability in the early days, and so a lot of the competitions being mainly score-based and not, PvP or against another person, there was limitations to what they could do. In the mid to late 90s, PC gaming really took off and started to evolve into what we see today. Most of you have heard of Unreal Tournament, or Quake, or Counter-Strike, and probably even MechWarrior, and StarCraft, of course, and all of those games had big competitions even in the late 90s where many people made livings off of the prize money. Now, of course, there weren't as many people making livings playing it back then, but now you have people all over the place that just play video games professionally. As far as eSports goes, it's already a $500 million industry worldwide and expected to grow to almost $2 billion by the end of 2018 alone. Now, I understand video games aren't for everybody. Not everybody's going to like video games. Some people just aren't going to like eSports. It's not their thing. Like me, for example. I don't really like hockey. I don't really watch soccer. I'll watch football and baseball and some basketball, but I don't like every sport, and I don't have to. That's perfectly fine. What I really want to do is defend against criticisms that are probably either unfair or unfounded, because there's a lot of that going on out there. For some reason, people feel like they need to delegitimize eSports because, they don't like it. And unfortunately, that comes from both inside the gaming industry and outside the gaming industry. First, let's take a look at video gamers themselves. I talked to a couple of people who are very into esports and competitive gaming, and they gave me a couple ideas of what they think gamers say about esports that's probably incorrect. There's always going to be talk about which platform is better, and PC Master Race, and console noobs, and some people like this game and that game and this one's better, whatever. That's not what this is about. But the most common thing that you'll hear from video gamers is, I could be a pro gamer if I only had the time. Time commitment is a big factor. Pretty much any esports athlete, and we'll get back to that word later too, spends 8 to 12 hours a day playing and or training in their game. Lots of people simply don't have that kind of time to spend playing video games. That's fine. Yeah, a lot of us don't have 8 hours to play a single video game every day, much less more learning the ins and outs and whatnot. And for a lot of the games out there, especially your MOBAs, so League of Legends or Dota, there is a ton of stuff to learn. So if you don't know all those things, you're going to be at a disadvantage when you go to play that game. But just playing hundreds or thousands of hours of that game doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good enough to compete. Every one of you out there knows somebody who's played a video game or a specific type of video game probably close to their whole life. They enjoy it, they have fun, they play every version of it, but they're still not very good. It happens, right? You know, people can do something for their whole lives and they can still enjoy it. That's great. They can have fun, but that doesn't mean because they have this many hours put into it that they're going to be able to compete at the highest level. I personally play quite a few different varieties of games, but first-person shooters tend to be the ones that I'm probably better at than I am at other games. For example, right now on PC I play Overwatch. I just qualified for the newest season of competitive matches. I haven't been playing very much, and right now I'm like middle of the pack at best. I've been as high as maybe top 30%, and that's not even really getting into organized competitive play. Most games, you don't even start to really see good strategy until you hit the top 10%, and in a lot of these games, top 10% still a million players. So in terms of just needing more time, it's just simply not true. There is a skill barrier. You either got that hand-eye coordination that you're going to need, or you don't. It's not as simple as I know everything about the game. You still have to be able to execute, and that's true about anything. Very high level of hand-eye coordination is going to be needed to compete at the highest level, as well as a deep knowledge of both the game itself and the characters and how they interact with each other and your opposing gamers. So most gamers don't complain too much about esports other than they might be mad that somebody's making money playing video games and they aren't, and that's just the way it is. It's the non-gamer criticisms that probably bother me the most. There's a video that came out a little over a year ago by Colin Cowherd, formerly of ESPN. I will spare you the video here, but he had the basic criticism of gamers. They're all pimple-faced nerds living in their mother's basements, eating Doritos, drinking Mountain Dew, and have probably never talked to a woman in their life. I'm pretty sure that covers most of the bases. Yes? Yeah, we'll move on. Anyone trying to have a rational conversation, not blowhards like Cowherd, would acknowledge that even if there's a small amount of the population that is like that, most professional and high-level gamers just simply aren't like that. Most of the biggest games in esports right now are team-based games, so a lot of these teams live together and play together on a daily basis. The next thing, a lot of them have very regimented schedules. They have time when they get up, they eat, they play, they take breaks, they play some more, they have physical activity, they have trainers. So even if you watch most esports, most of them aren't just fat blobs of people. They're pretty normal looking guys. None of these guys are going to be on the cover of Muscle and Fitness anytime soon, but they still are far from the pimple-faced Dorito eating nerds like you see in South Park. So I mentioned athletes earlier. There's a weird thing out there where people are really defensive of two words: athletes and sports. Athletes. They're not athletes because it's not physical. Fine, call them players. Who cares? They're athletes in esports. Why does that bother you? I mean, John Daly's an athlete. Look at the Olympics. Speedwalkers are athletes. So being defensive over the word athletes is just silly. And then there's sport. So first of all, they say esports. That's different from sport. Esports, sport. There's an E. There's no E. I don't know. It seems pretty simple to me. But since people still want to try and say it's not a real sport, it's a mind sport. Fine. It's like chess. Is that better for you? But then again, if you get butthurt about that, competitive tag is a sport now too. So what's more of a sport, video games or tag? I don't know. The thing that bothers me the most when it comes to people like Cowherd and people on the traditional sports side of things is when they bring up the whole thing of, I don't know why anybody would ever want to watch somebody play video games. So they have a problem with people watching other people play games when they make a living watching other people play children's games. Because that's really all sports are. They're just games. They don't mean anything. They're not some higher purpose. It's simply entertainment that started off as games for either children or college kids. And again, I know it's probably just a shtick with people like Cowherd that just want to say, whatever, video games, I don't like video games. But football, I'll watch people play that all day. It's really simple. People like watching other people play video games because they've played those games. Just like I like watching football because I played football and baseball, and I enjoy watching people play it at a high level. So is it really that hard to understand why somebody would like to watch people play video games competitively? It's also how you get better. You see people do things and you're like, hey, I haven't tried that before. That looks like a good tactic. Maybe I'll try that the next time I play so I can get a little bit better. So really, it's just that's probably the dumbest thing you can say, especially if that same person says it and then turns around and drinks their beer and continues watching the football game that's on TV. That being said, not everything is perfect about esports. It's growing very rapidly. There's lots of different organizations getting into it. There's basketball teams buying up esports teams. There's TV stations getting in on the game. It's growing at a very rapid pace, but there's a lot of things that they're still trying to figure out. There's issues like player rights, league rights, and one of the things that I think is going to be one of the bigger hurdles is growing their audience. Obviously, the core audience is gamers. People who play games, people who like games. Obviously, that's going to be the core audience for the long term. They obviously haven't maximized that market, but when you see the Philadelphia 76ers buying a team and the Miami Heat buying a team, and you see, other people, other famous people and big organizations buying esports teams, they expect it to be more popular than just with gamers. But that probably really is going to be the hardest thing, is to get people who aren't currently gamers to watch esports. 2 out of the top 3 games in esports right now are League of Legends and Dota. Both of them are MOBAs, or multiplayer online battle arenas. Yeah, I know I probably already lost you, but it's 5-on-5, you're trying to destroy the other base. Sounds pretty simple when you go down to the very basic level. Realistically though, the games have probably the highest learning curves of any multiplayer game out there. If you haven't played that style of game before, it's probably 20 to 30 games before you really have any clue what you're doing. Mind you, the games last 45 minutes or more, so you're going to be 20 to 30 hours into a game before you kind of understand what you're going to do with one character. Why do I bring up one character? Well, League of Legends has 134 and Dota has 102. So each team can comprise a team of 5 out of 100 plus characters who all have 4 distinct different abilities that interact with other characters. Wrap that all up in a store that has hundreds of items that you have to buy and build your character throughout the course of a game. And you've got so many things you have to learn that just being a player in these games takes 50 plus hours before you can feel competent. Really, when I first started playing these games, my teammates hated me. They probably still hate me when I play them. I play other games. So even to be a competent player, it takes tens or hundreds of hours to learn all the ins and outs. And really, like I said, other than telling them it's 5-on-5 and they're trying to destroy the other base, if I'm going to try and explain to somebody who has no idea what this game is about and try and show them a game, they're probably going to lose interest pretty quick. The other of the 3 big games, though, Counter-Strike, is definitely easier to watch for a casual fan. Again, simple setup. 2 teams, go kill each other. There's a bomb planting thing. Don't even really need to worry about it most of the time. It really just kind of focuses the action into one location. Unlike both of the MOBAs, there isn't constant action and trying to figure out where the characters are and all these explosions, and it's really hard to follow. There's basically 5 guys with guns against 5 guys with guns. The rounds go pretty quick. You can kind of tell what's going on because people are dying. It's a lot easier to follow, and actually did fairly well in terms of television ratings when it was on TBS this last year. Sure, there are layers to the game where a very competitive player is going to know a lot more than somebody that hasn't played it very much or is just watching on television, but that doesn't change the game the way some of those other games, the understanding changes what you're watching. As with traditional sports, I could probably sit down with somebody who's never watched Counter-Strike. I could take 10 minutes of watching a competitive match and get them to understand the basics. Whether they enjoy it or not is still up to them, but I could get them to understand it as well as I could get them to understand football or basketball or baseball or hockey. Now maybe esports didn't need defending. Plenty of people know about it, and there's another group that begrudgingly accepts that it exists. I still wanted to address a couple of the misconceptions if they're still out there, and some of the common things that people try and knock it down, because there's really no reason to knock it. You could not like it, that's fine. People don't like all sorts of things. I don't really like college basketball. I don't watch soccer, and that's fine. I like other sports, but I don't try and say soccer shouldn't be a sport. They don't use their hands. What do you mean you don't use your hands in sports? That's garbage. No, that's stupid. You don't make up reasons of why it shouldn't be a thing. You just don't do it. I personally still watch more traditional sports, although I don't get around to it as much as I'd like. But I do like watching Counter-Strike tournaments as well. It's a lot like American football in the way that it really kind of has these periods where you don't have to pay super close attention, and then you get a really nice chunk of action, and then you get a break. And it kind of has that same kind of flow where you don't have to be really, really concentrating the whole time. So I think I covered most of the issues. I probably missed something. Let me know in the comments if you think there's something I should have said that I didn't. I'm sure I screwed something up, so if you want me to correct me on that, that's fine too. But either way, I hope you liked it. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, because next time I'm defending bronies. Until next time, have a blast.